Hey guys, Torn McGrath here with the first of a series of reviews I'm doing on kukris from Knives by Hand. First up is a prototype of what's being tentatively called the Blackened Survival or Camp Khukuri. Okay, so here are the basic specs on the knife. The overall length is 17.5 inches. The blade length is 11.5 inches. The handle, measured from the back of the pommel to the front, is 6 inches, but the grip area in here within the grip within the handle is 4.5 inches. I have pretty big hands, and it fits me. You can see it fits me very, very well. There's an interesting cutout back here on the grip, which gives you a good place to choke up, putting pressure with your thumb. So if you're doing fine carving in the base area here, you have good control. The handle's made out of rosewood, and I don't know if you can catch it on camera, but the pins are very well done. This is an aluminum rod inside a copper tube. If you can notice the two colors there, and there's different carvings, and I guess it looks like a lightning bolt carving mark there, and a copper tube for the lanyard hole. I want you to pay attention to the tang here. You notice it's a distal taper on the tang. It's a full tang. On this side, it's more in line with the blade edge in terms of thickness. But notice how it tapers from the full 1/4 inch thick spine down this way. What's nice about this is it kind of gives you the best of both worlds. It gives you the strength of a full tang, but the balance of a rat tail tang, which tends to give you more chopping power. The weight on this is 18.75 ounces, which puts it in the class of a lot of quick bowies I own. For instance, the Trailmaster is 17 ounces. But the Kukri design, at least in my experience, gives it a better chop than a bowie of the same weight, because the weight is more forward. You'll see the blade is also distal tapered, and distal taper simply means it's starting thick and gradually getting thinner. But what I like is the tip is not so thin that it's likely to break. If you see the grind line here, it goes up onto about 2 inches, 2.5 inches from the tip. So you have good strength. The scabbard or sheath is a Western style, but it's leather, but it's done in water buffalo hide from Nepal. Nepal being a Hindu religious country, will not use cows, will not kill cows as a normal part of their daily life. The leather is pretty thick though. It's about 3/16, and I like the way the sheath is set up. You have the rivets here. You have the dangler or belt loop on a separate piece from the backer, which is very nice, which means that when you sheath it, you're not trying to fit into a narrow opening, and you have to hit that precisely, or else you wind up stabbing yourself or ripping up the sheath. So it slides in very easily, and you see you have that open top here. It has a good thick welt, which is actually comprised of 2 separate strips of leather. So the whole piece here is almost 1/2 inch thick, with tubular rivets and sewing. What's nice about this is with the traditional DAP or Kukri sheath, you really have to clamshell your fingers as you draw to keep from cutting your fingers in case that Kukri cuts through the wood. Inside that thin layer of leather is a wood on a traditional sheath. And you'll see that this also in the Philippines, where you'll have a wooden sheath and it may be just covered with rattan skin in a kind of a rope tie to bind it together. Where this type of sheath, that gap, I would be comfortable holding this as I draw, without worried about cutting my fingers. All right, now let's go to some modifications I might make and recommend. Oh, one more thing. Back on here, you'll see a separate leather belt loop, separate lock, which you can fold back and lock separately, tie together if you don't want to use that. But I like the fact that it has a dangler ring, so I could put this on a carabiner on my belt if I want a little lower drop off of my belt. So, nicely thought out sheath. All right, now we'll go into some modifications I want to make. I would suggest to Frank Gonzalez over at Knives by Hand to make this even more of a survival knife, in my opinion. All right, let me talk about some aspects of adding strength to blade design. Many years ago, circus and carnival strongmen used to do a trick with a thick phone book. In New York, we used the Manhattan Yellow Pages, which was probably about as thick as this knife catalog. And they would go and rip the phone book in half. Now, if you hold it like this, just normally, and you're ripping the full, pardon me, trying to rip the full 3 inches thick phone book, that would be pretty impressive feat, right? But what they would do is angle it. Let me turn it this way you could see. They would angle it so that because it's on a slope, they grab it, they're then ripping just a few pages at a time, and they rip the book. I've done it. You still need a decent amount of strength, but not like ripping a full 2 or 3 inch piece of phone book. The reason I mention that is the cho, or the notch, that's in a regular kukri. Hold on, I'm gonna have to get one and show you. So when you have a notch or cho in a kukri, which is that semicircle cutout, you're essentially taking the thickness from the cutting edge and going back up to, this thicker part of the blade. So if you're having a cross twisting in the blade, you're not ripping on the cutting edge, you're putting the force on that thicker piece of steel. So if you could picture this phone book, if I drilled a hole here, a circular hole here, and I tried to rip it at that point, I'm not ripping one piece of paper at a time. I'm trying to rip the full thickness of the phone book again, right? So the recommendation I would make to Frank would be to add a plain, unadorned notch right at the juncture where it meets the thickness, the full thickness of the blade stock. So right at the base of the edge. I've heard this called a Spanish notch or a sharpening notch. You'll see this on other blades. It allows you to sharpen right up to that edge. You get your stone right up to that point for sharpening. But it also acts as a spring hinge. If you think of, first off, the edges on these are most often zone tempered. On the traditional kukri, they get this red hot and then take a teapot of water and just pour it along the cutting edge to quench it and not get that hard. Knives by Hand, also Kailash blades, I believe, they take their 5160. First off, they're both new stock. It's not old leaf springs. They buy new steel. And then they will quench fully into an oil bath and get it stopping up at the ricasso area, or the thickest part of the tang. And then they'll zone temper by what's called blue backing. They'll take a torch, at least the way we would do it in the United States with the blade makers I spoke to, take a torch and get the back of this until it's blue hot, which is significantly less than the cherry red for quenching. And then that temperature will gradually go in towards the cutting edge, but won't detemper the cutting edge. And that'll give you a nice, springy, strong, tough spine with a hard cutting edge. And then you'll go and take it and bake the whole thing at a certain temperature to relieve stresses in the blade. That's really the tempering process, right? So if you can put a circular cutout to bring the cutting edge up to full thickness at that point, you'll have a stronger blade. What I would also do is, originally I was thinking, you know, we could take this little tab away. I think this is in this model, this is the MG2 from Knives by Hand. This is the one I'll be giving away during the May 7th Kukri class on Zoom. Anyway, nice Kukri. I purchased this from Frank last year at the Atlanta Blade Show. It's just a hair short for my hand. So I'm going to use this as a raffle item in the May 7th class. And then, because I'm doing that, Frank is nice enough to let me pick among the 4 Kukris he sent me for testing to keep. So the one I'm keeping is the survival blade. So I would add a notch in there. And I would also chamfer the edges of the notch. So instead of a simple circle, hole through the blade, I would chamfer round off each edge. And the reason for that is you're relieving stress fractures. Let me explain that in a moment. So about 20 years ago or so, Cold Steel sent me 4 copies of their Recon Scout for evaluation. They put different blade angles on the edge, or they had Scandi grinds, they had flat saber grinds, they had Appleseed grinds, and they wanted me to evaluate them. And one of them I ended up breaking right at the tang juncture. Here's a blade blank off a cheap stainless steel, Cold Steel clone of the Trailmaster, but the setup is basically the same in the tang area. And what they explained to me, they had a production run where the factory that was doing the water jet cutting had very sharp angles, right angles over here at where the tang met the shoulders of the ricasso. So that very sharp right angle made a stress riser, meaning that there's more stress in that area and put stress on the overall blade. So if you're there batoning on the wood, holding with the handle, that cutout of that sharp right angle is going to have all the stress focused on that point. And that's how the blades got snapped. And then they fixed it, and they've been doing better since then. You can have that on an outside angle, on a shoulder here. You can also have it on an inside angle. Here's a Becker BK2. This is the Gen 2 model. And I have another one, which is Gen 1, which does not have these lightning skeletonizing cutouts here. But they've had problems with the Gen 2's cracking right at these cutouts. And the reason being that outside edge is at a sharp right angle, and it will crack when you're batoning. So the suggestion I would have for Frank is, 1, put a circular, half circle notch or chow right at the blade ending where it goes into the finger grip here, right? But I would also chamfer those edges so you don't have that stress. So if you have the blade stuck in something and twisting it out, well, that force is not on a sharp angled edge. And then another thing I would do, let me get my machete. So for many years, I was modifying my outdoor machetes, my camping machetes, from a idea I saw from Mac Macintire. I think he's a year 1 or 2 winner of the TV show Alone. He was on the Blade forums or the bushcraft forums for many years. We conversed. Very nice guy, really sharp guy. He was a missionary in Brazil, or pastor in Brazil, and used to take the guy's out on missionary trips camping in the woods with an Army guy, local Army guy, and he had some real interesting ideas with machete use. One of those was he would take the close portion of the cutting edge and make it a flat scandy grind for woodworking, and then the top half would be a apple seed or a convex grind for chopping, right? The other thing was he would have just a small portion down here, might be with the spine rounded over for comfort, and another section up here. But he would have the main body over here at a very sharp right angle to use it as a planer, you know, like a sharp angled thing to smooth wood and take off the rough edges of wood, right? And I've done that on most of my camping machetes, and I did that on a few of my bigger Kukris. But then I realized two things. One, I want this Kukri for survival. This is for batoning wood, for chopping wood, for heavy wood processing. I'm not going to baton with my machetes. I will baton with this. So this comes with a sharp, very sharp 90-degree spine on top. It's probably even more than 90 degrees in sharpness because of the fullers in here, double fullers. I forget what they're called in Nepalese. But anyway, so you can use these to scrape a fire steel very well. But if I have a big honking blade like this, you know what? I probably have 2 or 3 or 4 knives or cutting tools with me anyway. I got a folding knife in my right pocket right now. I have a Swiss Army knife in my left pocket. I have a Leatherman tool in my backpack. So if I got this, I really don't need a 90-degree spine to scrape a fire steel. What I need is something that will not break. If I have a survival knife, its number one job is do not break, and it has a sharp edge, and an edge I can resharpen in the field. So what I would recommend to Frank is round over each of the sides of the spine. So you have less areas that might possibly be subject to a stress riser. The other thing I would do is, I hope this comes up on camera, but there are 2 relatively deep fullers in here. I'm trying to think of the name in Nepalese. I've seen it, but you guys know what I'm talking about. What I would recommend is one shallow one and move it slightly away from the spine to give that spine more strength. And the reason I'd rather have 2, probably one shallow one rather than 2 deep ones, is it's nice if you're doing something like skinning an animal or peeling bark off a tree with this big nice belly here, to be able to choke up on it and put your rest your thumb in that scooped out shallow fuller. I mean, this is not so sharp, especially up on top, that's going to cut your thumb or hurt your thumb, but it would be nice if it was shallow and one fuller, one dished area. The spine itself is kind of sharp if you were doing this and had to use it with any force. I'd rather have that spine have some meat on it. You know, it doesn't have to be a lot, a 16th, a 32nd, just something that is not a relatively sharp edge that your finger is going to lean against. But other than that, those are the only 2 modifications I would make. Oh, and another word about, when you see this blackened area, this is probably from the quenching process. This is carburized oil from the quench. This is a really, really super hard, super strong anti-rust coating, and almost a natural anti-rust coating. So, you know, it's maybe not as pretty as the fully polished ones, but this stuff really works well as an anti-rust agent or an anti-rust coating. And if you are going to choke up on it for any reason, You know, you might do fine carvings here. You might try to peel bark off a tree and peel that off, or skin an animal. If your finger is going to be on there with your acids in your sweat and whatnot, and salts in your sweat, it's nice to have that kind of coating in that area in the fuller, so you prevent rust. So that's the specs, at least, on the what's tentatively called the Blackened Camp or Survival Khukuri from Knives by Hand. So when I teach my introductory course for FMA students to the Kukri and other tools, what I usually do is give them two versions of our basic set of attacks. One is for a heavy tool. In the case of Kukri, it'd be my cold steel Gurkha Kukri Plus, which is, I think, 23 ounces. And with that, we will use a reinforced grip on the wrist, and the tertiary goes double force. Same means you got two hands of control on a one-handed weapon, right? Since the handle's not long enough to put two hands on it, so you put one hand here, and then we'll do our cuts and attacks from here with two hands pulling on it and pushing, so you have that speed and control, and you also can redirect it with more control over the blade. However, I also give a version that's a light version. So the we'll call it the Blackened Survival Khukuri is 17 3/4 ounces. This will use more like what you'll see the Gurkhas use in fighting, with a high guard and one-handed use. And you'll notice a lot of times when different Kukri makers talk about a fighting Kukri or a survival Kukri, they talk about the fighting Kukris are lighter in weight, the survival ones are more of a chopper, you want to use a hatchet. This is a very nice middle ground for me. At least a guy my size, you know, I can move this quickly, you know, and it still chops pretty hard. I'll show you some chopping video in a minute. You know, the older I get, the less I want to lug around, you know, things that are really, really heavy. And a lot of times when I go on a day hike, especially in my area, I don't know if you can see much behind me, but the woods are very dense. I use this both as a hatchet and as a machete. So if I'm going into a trail and there's vines coming through and different weeds and plants, I can come this out, I can pop this, and I can pop a vine without, you know, that'd be really hard to do with axe, right? And the reason I'm not simply brushing them out of the way and going is the same reason they don't brush, you know, wispy little plants out of the way in South America. There are insects on them you don't want to touch, or arachnids. So down there, you know, South America, you got bullet ants, you got scorpions. Up here we got ticks. Oh, we haven't got bit by a tick. But they have Lyme disease, which you don't want to get. They have something called Ehrlichia. Lyme disease is a bacterial infection. Ehrlichia is a viral infection that attacks the nervous system and can do you in pretty quickly, and there's no vaccine for it yet. So I like to get those vines out of the way. In the warm weather, I'm not, you know, chopping down logs the size of my legs, let's say. I'm chopping down pieces of sticks, you know, cutting on the size of my thumb. You know, I don't have to make a big campfire. And usually I don't have to make a fire per se, or a campfire. I usually have a stove with me. But if you're camping in the summertime, you want something light, doesn't weigh your pack down, that you can use as a machete, as a small hatchet, as a draw knife for doing different projects. This is a very useful tool. You can cut with this with control. It won't fatigue your arm if you're cutting brush, you know, down a trail, walking for, you know, a few miles. But this will still bite harder than let's say a Bowie knife of the same weight. Now I'll show you some chopping video in a moment. Okay, so let's compare three tools in use. Here's a cold steel Gurkha Kukri Plus in the less expensive stainless steel. I think it's 4336 or 4036, something like that. But it is a full flat ground blade that tends to bite into wood deeply. It's heavy, so I tend to use it with a two-hand grip here. One hand supported here. In Preproduction, we call this double force. But watch how the log moves. So it hits hard, bites deep. I have had this, because of the flat grind, bite into the side grain and get stuck temporarily. Be that as it may, you know, it's just a comparison. So here is the Blackened Survival Khukuri prototype from Knives by Hand. This is 17 3/4 ounces. I can use this one-handed. And it's very comfortable to use one-handed. And the next blade is a Cold Steel Trailmaster in Sanmai stainless steel. Obviously it does not hit as hard as the heavier blades, but it does move fast. To me, this Kukri has a nice medium between speed and power. A Kukri, generally speaking, in my experience with the blades I have, of the same weight as a buoy, will chop harder than the buoy because you have that more weight forward feel. I like the blade design on this because of the double distal taper. It's almost like a bow, you know, an archer's bow, and that it has that flex, that the place that receives the strongest stress or the highest amount of stress is the thickest part of the blade, and then it tapers off towards the ends. So when you flex this, you want that stress to be received in the thickest part of the blade, and this does this because of the full tang, but it's a tapered tang. So you have that, you still have the best of both worlds. Forward weight heavy, but a strong tang in the grip. So I like this a lot. Please look over my modifications. Let Frank Gonzalez know at Knives by Hand. This is just a prototype. Let him know which ones you like, which ones you don't like, so that he can, when he goes into production, he has a better idea of what his customers would like. Thank you.